I went into the woods because I needed quiet and did not want to pay for it. That was the simple truth. It was late October, years ago, after I had quit a job that drained me without noticing. I picked a stretch of state forest a few hours from where I lived. No named trails, no campground, no cell service. Just trees and distance. I parked at a locked service road, shouldered my pack, and walked in until the road vanished into leaf cover. The forest was mixed hardwood and pine, already thinning for winter. Leaves carpeted the ground, wet and slick from recent rain. The air smelled like soil and decay, clean but heavy. I walked until the sound of the road disappeared, then another mile past that. I chose a spot near a shallow creek and set camp. Everything felt ordinary, too ordinary to worry me. The first sign that something was off came before dark. I noticed the ground near my tent was already pressed flat in places. Not old enough to be last season. Leaves crushed, stems snapped clean. It looked like someone had knelt there recently. I told myself it was runoff from rain, animals bedding down, anything that fit easier. That night passed without incident. I slept light, but nothing woke me. In the morning, I walked the area to get a sense of the land. That was when I found the markings. Not blazes or tape, just shallow cuts in bark, vertical, paired, always facing toward my camp. Some were chest high, some higher. They were not deep, but they were fresh. I told myself it was a hunter marking direction. It was not hunting season there, but rules bend. I stayed another night. On the second day, I noticed sounds carrying wrong. When I moved, the forest stayed quiet longer than it should have. Birds did not return fast. Squirrels did not chatter. Even the creek sounded dull, like the water was being swallowed by the ground. I kept turning my head, expecting to see movement. Nothing showed itself. That night, I heard footsteps. They were not close. They were not far. Just outside the ring where my firelight faded. Leaves shifting under careful weight. One step at a time, then a pause, then another step, timed with the wind. I sat still and listened. The steps circled wide. No cough, no stumble, no rush. Whoever it was knew how sound worked out there. I did not leave my tent. I did not call out. I waited. The steps stopped near the creek and stayed there until dawn. In the morning, I found tracks where the bank was soft. Boot prints, old boots, worn soles. They did not cross my camp. They ringed it. Someone had walked a slow loop and stopped often. I followed the prints downstream until they vanished into stones. I should have left then. Instead, I moved camp deeper. I told myself distance would fix it. I walked another hour and found a small rise with good cover. No flattened ground. No markings nearby. I set up again and forced myself to relax. That evening, I found my food bag hanging lower than I left it. Not torn, not opened, just lowered. The knot retied, sloppy but holding. Someone had touched my things and wanted me to know it. The fear that came with that was quiet and sharp. It did not spike, settled. I packed what I could before dark and kept the rest close. I did not light a fire. After midnight, the breathing started. Came from uphill, slow and deep. Not strained, not sick, just steady lungs pulling cold air. Stayed in one place for a long time. When I shifted in my sleeping bag, it paused. When I stayed still, it continued. I counted breaths without meaning to. I lost count and started again. At some point, the sound moved downslope, closer. Leaves shifted. A branch bent and did not snap. The breathing stayed even. I lay there until my legs cramped. I thought about making noise, about shining my light. I thought about how exposed that would make me. I stayed still. Near dawn, the breathing stopped. I did not sleep again. In the morning light, I found more signs. A place where someone had sat against a tree, bark scraped smooth at shoulder height. A shallow pit covered with leaves, not deep enough to hide much. A strip of fabric snagged on thorns, dark and stiff with old sweat. I followed none of it far. I packed and left. The walk out felt longer than the walk in. Every sound made me turn. I did not see anyone. When I reached the service road, I felt relief that made my hands shake. My car was untouched. A week later, I went back with a ranger. I did not camp. I showed him where I had been. He did not look surprised. He showed me things I had missed. A crude shelter farther in. Food caches buried shallow. Tree markings used as sightlines. He explained that some people lived out there year-round, avoiding contact, watching camps for patterns. They moved things instead of stealing them to see reactions, to see who stayed. The breathing was explained too. Person resting, staying low, conserving heat. Sound carries strange in cold air. They never found the man. They cleared the shelters and warned others. I never returned. I still go into the woods, but not like that. I stay where people pass through. I keep light on at night. When something feels watched, I leave. The forest itself is not the danger. It is what people become when they live in it long enough and learn how to stay unseen. It was the summer of 1996, and I was stationed alone in a temporary fire lookout deep in a dense stretch of forest in Montana. The structure was not one of the old iconic towers you see in photos. It was a simple raised platform with a narrow cabin on top, bolted together in sections and hauled out by helicopter earlier that season. A straight metal ladder ran up one side, ending at a small hatch in the floor. No wraparound catwalk. No railings beyond what was needed. Just enough to stand watch and scan the tree line. The forest around me was thick and uneven. Lodgepole pine and fir packed close together, with little light reaching the ground. During the day, it felt endless and quiet. At night, it felt sealed. The trees blocked wind at ground level, so air moved high above while everything below stayed still. Storms rolled through that week, heavy and slow. Rain came in sheets, then hail, then long hours of low thunder that never seemed to break. My radio went dead early on. I checked it often, but nothing came through. The antenna had likely taken a hit. I was used to being alone, but not cut off. The quiet that followed the storms felt wrong. It was not empty, felt loaded. The first night after the radio went out, I heard breathing. It came from directly below the tower, deep and slow, not labored, not rushed, just steady intake and release. Too heavy to be wind, too close to be imagined. I froze and listened. It continued without pause, as if whoever or whatever it was did not care whether I noticed. I leaned over the trapdoor and looked down through the slats. The floodlight was off. The ground below was dark, but I could make out the shape of the ladder, wet and dull from rain. The breathing came again, closer now, echoing faintly against the metal supports. I told myself it had to be an animal, a bear passing through, something sheltering from the rain. Bears breathe loud. I had heard that before. Still, I did not sleep much that night. In the morning, I climbed down to check the ground. The soil was soft and dark from days of rain. Around the base of the ladder, I saw impressions pressed deep into the mud. They looked like hands at first glance. 5 long shapes fanned out from a central pad. But the proportions were wrong. The finger marks stretched too long, smeared forward as if dragged. The spacing made no sense. Too narrow for bare paws, too long for human hands. I knelt and looked closer. The impressions were not clean. They were distorted, as if something had pressed down and then shifted weight. Mud had pulled and stretched before releasing. I told myself that was all it was. Mud does strange things when pressure lifts. The second night, the breathing came back. It started after dark and did not move. It stayed directly under the tower, slow and patient. I counted the gaps between breaths without meaning to. Nothing changed. It did not circle. It did not leave. Simply stayed. I did not turn on the floodlight that night. I wanted to know if it would move on its own. It did not. I lay on the narrow cot and listened until my jaw hurt from clenching. The third night, the storm returned harder. Wind slammed the trees above me, but nothing moved below. The breathing continued, steady under the noise. At one point, I heard a faint scrape against the ladder, metal against something dull. Then nothing. By morning, new impressions surrounded the ladder. More of the same stretched shapes. Some overlapped. Some pressed so deep that water pooled inside them. I followed them outward and found where someone had stood just beyond the drip line of the tower roof. The ground there was packed flatter than the rest. I stopped telling myself it was an animal. I turned on the floodlight before dusk that night. The beam washed the ground in harsh white, cutting through the trees in a wide cone. Nothing stood there, no movement. When dark fully set in, the breathing did not come. The silence felt thinner than before, but I slept. For the next 3 nights, I kept the light on. Fuel burned fast, but I did not care. No breathing, no sounds beyond insects and distant wind. The impressions dried and cracked in the sun. On the 6th day, the radio came back to life. Short bursts at first, then clear signal. I reported everything. The breathing, the marks, the lack of contact. A team came out the next morning. They found signs I had missed. A shallow depression farther out, covered with branches. Food scraps buried poorly. A length of rope tied high on a tree, the fibers worn smooth. Someone had been using the tower as a reference point. A shelter, a place to wait out weather. The impressions were explained in pieces. A person wearing oversized gloves, fingers stiff with mud and water. Weight shifted forward while crouched. Hands pressed and dragged as balance was regained. The stretched shapes were not anatomy. They were motion captured in soft ground. The breathing was human. Slow because the person had been still for hours, conserving energy. Deep because the air was cold and damp. The floodlight removed the one thing that let him stay there unnoticed. He was found 2 weeks later several miles north, living rough and avoiding contact. No charges stuck. Trespassing warnings. Medical hold. He never returned to that section of forest. I finished the season and did not volunteer for remote postings again. I still think about how close that breathing was, how patient it sounded, how it stopped only when I took away the dark. Some people disappear into forests and learn how to exist quietly. When weather cuts off contact and light stays off, they feel safe enough to stay close. 5 of us went camping in early September of 2021 as a cheap bachelor weekend. No flights, no rentals, just one long drive, coolers, tents, and a loose plan. We picked a national forest in Oregon because it was free and far enough that no one would bother us. I did not plan the trip. I just drove my truck and followed directions sent to my phone. The road narrowed, then turned to gravel, then to dirt with grass growing down the middle. Cell service dropped off miles before we stopped. The campsite sat in a shallow bowl of trees, open enough for sunlight but boxed in on all sides. Fir and pine, thick trunks, little undergrowth. The fire ring was already there. The ground was packed flat in places, dark from old ash. That was the first thing I noticed. It looked used, not abandoned, used recently. The permit board at the entrance said no other permits were active. We shrugged it off. People lie. Boards do not get updated. None of us cared enough to question it. We set up fast. Tents went up where the ground felt smooth. Coolers stayed in the truck bed at first, then got moved closer as night came on. The air smelled clean and cold, that dry forest smell that settles into clothes. Everything felt normal, loud, even. We cooked, drank, laughed. Sound carried far, then came back thin and warped between the trees. When the fire burned down and everyone turned in, I stayed up a bit longer. I liked watching the embers. The forest beyond the light looked flat, like a wall painted black. Bugs clicked and chirped. Wind moved through the tops. Nothing felt wrong yet. I woke up before sunrise with my mouth dry. The fire pit was cold. Ash was disturbed. Footprints pressed through it. Not deep, light, barely there. I thought someone had gotten up during the night. Then I noticed the food. The cooler was closed, locked. Nothing inside was missing, but the loose items we had left out were gone from where we set them. A loaf of bread, sealed meat packs, a bag of marshmallows. I followed the beam of my headlamp and found them placed in a line just beyond where the firelight would have reached. Not scattered, not torn, lined up clean, side by side, wrappers intact. No bite marks, no drag marks, no mess. Felt wrong in a quiet way. Animals steal and run. They tear and spill. This looked deliberate. Someone had taken the time to arrange it. We stood around it in the early light, tired and stiff. No one joked. The trees looked closer than they had the night before. The forest floor held no clear tracks, just needles and hard dirt. We decided it had to be a person, a nearby camper messing with us, someone passing through. We moved the food back and packed it all into the truck. The mood shifted but did not break. We stayed. That afternoon passed without anything else happening. We hiked a short distance, drank water, came back. No voices carried, no engines, no movement beyond our own. The silence felt deep but not empty. As night came again, the temperature dropped fast. We lit the fire and kept it going brighter than before. Shadows jumped and stretched. That was when one of us said he had seen something between the trees. Upright, still, too thin to be a bear. He pointed into the dark and then looked away like he did not want to see it again. I followed his stare and saw nothing, just trunks and gaps. I told myself it was light and fatigue. The mind fills space when it gets tired. The fire cracked, wood popped. At some point, the sounds of the forest changed. Not stopped, shifted. Insects went quiet near us, louder farther out. The wind moved higher up, not at ground level. I felt watched without being able to say why. I stayed close to the fire. When I looked into the trees, I had the sense of depth being wrong, like something was standing just beyond where my eyes settled. We turned in early. No one wanted to be the last awake. I lay in my tent listening. Fabric moved with my breathing. The ground pressed hard into my back. I heard steps at some point. Slow, careful. They circled wide. No brush snapping. No hurry. When the wind picked up, the steps came. When it died, they stopped. I thought of the food. I thought of the neat line beyond the firelight. Morning came gray and cold. Mist clung low to the ground. We packed without talking much. No one said it out loud, but we all wanted to leave. As we loaded the truck, I found marks on a tree near where the food had been placed. Long scratches, fresh, high up, too high for a raccoon. Clean cuts through bark. On the way out, we stopped at a ranger station farther down the highway. I asked about recent activity near that section of forest. The ranger pulled out a map and marked an area with his finger. He told me a transient man had been living off-grid in that part of the forest for months, avoiding permits, avoiding contact. He had been reported for food interference at campsites. Not theft, interference, moving items, watching camps, standing still to see reactions. He had been tall and underweight. He wore layered clothing and moved at night. They suspected untreated mental illness combined with isolation. They had not caught him yet. He moved camps often and stayed just inside the tree line, far enough to watch but not close enough to be seen clearly. The explanation settled everything into place. The used campsite, the permit board, the food arranged instead of stolen, the upright shape too thin to be an animal, the careful steps timed with the wind. A person who had learned how to exist unnoticed in the woods, who studied people the way animals do. We drove home in silence for the first hour. No one wanted to joke about it. The forest had not been empty. It had been occupied by someone who did not want to be found and did not mind being seen just enough to unsettle. I still camp. I still like the quiet. But when food is moved instead of taken, and when a place looks lived in without signs of life, I leave. The woods can hide many things. The worst ones know how to stay just far enough away to watch. This happened around 2009, when I was 17 and thought routine made things safe. I worked the evening shift at a gas station off a 2-lane road. When my shift ended, I cut through a stretch of woods to get home. To save time, I had walked it hundreds of times. The path was narrow and uneven, but my feet knew every route and dip. I trusted that place because it never changed. The woods sat between the road and a row of houses. No signs, no trails marked on maps, just trees pressed close together, then a shallow ravine, then more trees that opened near my street. I walked it year-round. In summer, bugs and heat. In winter, crunching snow. At night, it was never quiet. Crickets, frogs, wind, distant traffic. Even when nothing moved, something always made noise. That night felt wrong before I reached the trees. The air was heavy, damp in a way that clung to skin. The sky was clear, but there was no breeze. I stepped off the road and into the shade, and the sound dropped out as if someone had shut a door. No insects, no leaves shifting. My footsteps sounded loud and sharp. I slowed without thinking. I kept walking because fear felt stupid. This was a shortcut I used every night. I told myself silence happened sometimes. Weather did things. Animals moved on. I focused on the path and the glow from the houses ahead, faint through the trees. About halfway in, the smell hit me. Came low and thick, like something soaked and sour. Rot mixed with wet fur. I had smelled dead animals before, but this was stronger, closer. It filled my nose and stayed there. I stopped and breathed through my mouth, trying not to gag. That was when I noticed the marks on the trees. Fresh scratches, pale against dark bark. They were not low. They were high, well above my head, long and deep, angled downward. Some trees had one set. Others had several, spaced apart, as if something had stood there more than once. The wood was still raw. Sap glistened. I felt small then. I had seen deer rubs before, but these were wrong. Too sharp, too high. I stood still and listened. Nothing answered back. The silence pressed in until my ears rang. I took a few steps forward. The smell grew stronger, then faded as I moved past it. I told myself to keep going. Turning around felt worse. I tried to set a steady pace, not fast, not slow. Behind me, something moved. It was not a step. It was a shift, a soft compression of leaves, almost nothing. I stopped. It stopped. I took another step. It matched me. No rhythm, no stumble, just presence. My chest tightened. I did not look back. I knew better. I picked up my pace. The path dipped into the ravine, then rose on the other side. As I went down, the smell came back strong, like a wet blanket pulled over my face. I fought the urge to run. At the bottom, I heard it again, closer now. Still no sound that made sense. No breathing, no brush snapping, just movement when I moved, and stillness when I froze. I ran. My feet pounded the ground, slipping on loose dirt. My lungs burned. I expected crashing behind me, the rush of something careless. It never came. Whatever followed matched my speed without noise. Not gaining, not falling back, keeping distance. The woods blurred. Branches slapped my arms. I did not dare slow down. I focused on the slope ahead and the faint light beyond it. My heart hammered so hard it hurt. Near the top, I tripped and caught myself on a tree. My fingers slid over fresh gouges in the bark. I pushed off and ran again. The silence stayed unbroken. I burst out of the trees into the open space near my street and did not stop until I reached my front door. I went inside shaking, locked it, and sat on the floor until my breath slowed. I avoided the woods for days. I took the long way home, walking along the road with cars passing close. Felt safer than trees. When I finally went back in daylight, I stayed near the edge. I found the source of the smell in a thicket off the path. A deer carcass, partly covered with leaves and dirt. The neck was broken. The body was opened cleanly. It had been dragged there. Flies buzzed thick around it. I noticed more marks then. Scratches on trees leading away from the cache, spaced in a loose line. Some were old, some fresh. I saw tracks in the soft soil, large and round, edges blurred by time. I did not need to measure them to know they were not dog prints. Later that year, a notice went up at the edge of the woods, stapled to a post. It warned about a mountain lion seen in the area. It advised people to avoid walking alone at dawn and dusk, to keep children close, to report sightings. I read it twice, my hands cold. I learned more after that. How cats move without sound. How they follow without chasing, testing distance. How they cache kills and mark trees high with claws to signal territory. How prey goes quiet when a predator is near. How the forest holds its breath. Nothing supernatural had been there. No shape from a story. Just an animal doing what it had done long before roads and gas stations cut through its range. I had walked through its path at the wrong time, carrying the smell of work and youth and fear. I never used that shortcut again. Years passed. Houses went up. The woods thinned. The notices stopped. But even now, when a place goes quiet in a way it should not, my body remembers that night. Silence can mean many things. Sometimes it means you are not alone, and whatever is near you has already decided to stay unseen. I went back in July of 2018 with a pack that felt heavier than it should have. Most of the weight came from a small metal container wrapped in a shirt. My younger brother loved the Wind River Range. We had camped there as kids with our father, catching cold fingers in streams and sleeping through storms we did not understand yet. After he died, the idea of leaving a part of him there felt right. I had not returned since we were young. I told myself the hike would be familiar, but it was not. Trails shift, trees fall, memory fills gaps that reality does not care about. I parked at a rough pullout and started before noon. The air smelled sharp and clean, with a dry edge that meant no rain. The trail thinned as I went higher, then broke into game paths and open forest. I chose a route I remembered, though it existed more in my head than on the ground. The woods were quiet in a way that felt tight. Birds moved, but their sounds came and went in short bursts, as if they did not want to linger. I kept stopping to look around, expecting to see someone else, but there was nothing. By late afternoon, I reached a small clearing near a bend in a creek. The place matched my memory enough to settle me. I pitched my tent and set my pack inside. When I walked the area to stretch my legs, I noticed the first pile of bones. They sat near the base of a spruce, stacked in a neat cone. Small ribs, a skull split clean, leg bones aligned as if someone had taken time with them. They were bleached and dry. I told myself it was a predator cache. I had seen scattered remains before. This was different. It was careful. I found another pile 10 minutes later, then a third. Each was near a tree. None were hidden. They were placed where a person would see them. I felt watched, though nothing moved. The forest did not change. The feeling stayed. I scattered the ashes at dusk along the creek, letting them fall into the water and onto the stones where we had once slipped and laughed. The act drained me. Grief works like that. It empties and leaves space that fills with other things. When night came, the woods felt closer. Sounds carried farther. I ate, cleaned up, and sat until dark pressed in. I crawled into the tent early. Sleep came in pieces. I woke to wind in the trees, then to silence. The quiet felt wrong. At some point, I heard a slow step on pine needles. It stopped. I held my breath. The wind picked up and another step came, measured, careful. It went around the camp at a wide distance. Each step landed when the branches moved. Whoever it was knew how sound worked out there. I did not hear a stumble or a rush, just patience. I lay still until my muscles ached. The circling took a long time. When it ended, the forest returned to its normal noise, as if a switch had been flipped. I did not sleep again until morning light cut through the tent. At dawn, I walked the perimeter. I found tracks where the soil was soft. They were boot prints, worn soles, not new but clear enough. They stayed just beyond the edge of my cleared space. I told myself a hunter had passed through. July was wrong for that, but rules bend in remote places. I packed light for a day hike and went upstream, trying to keep my mind busy. The bones showed up again farther out. More piles. Same care. I noticed other signs then. A strip of bark shaved off a trunk at shoulder height. A length of wire half buried near a fallen log. A place where the ground had been cleared and tamped flat. I started to see a pattern that made sense in a way I did not like. Someone used the area often. Someone marked it. By afternoon, the heat built and the insects came out. I headed back, telling myself I would leave after one more night. I had promised myself 2 nights. I wanted to sit once more by the creek and finish what I came to do in my own way. I did not want fear to rush me. I moved camp slightly closer to the water, hoping the open space would help. I set my headlamp and kept my knife close. When dark came again, the wind rose earlier. I listened hard. The circling started before full night. It was closer this time. The steps were still timed with the gusts, but the distance shrank. The person moved where my firelight did not reach. I smelled something sour, like old sweat and wet fabric. It drifted and vanished. I stayed still. I did not turn my head. My body felt small inside the tent. The steps paused near my pack, then moved on. I waited for a rush that never came. The patience felt worse. Near midnight, the wind died. The steps stopped with it. The silence pressed down until my ears rang. Then a branch snapped far off. Too loud, too careless. Whoever it was moved away. At first light, I packed without eating. I walked the area again, keeping my back to open ground. Near a stand of young trees, I found a trail camera strapped high, angled down toward the clearing. The lens pointed where my tent had been the first night. I did not touch it. I backed away and left. The hike out felt longer. Every noise turned my head. When I reached the trailhead, my car sat alone. The relief made me weak. I drove until service returned, then went straight to the ranger station down valley. I filled out a report. I listed what I had seen: the bones, the camera, the tracks. I did not use words like stalked. I stuck to facts. Weeks later, a letter came. It explained that officers had found an illegal trapping operation deep in the forest. The bones matched small animals taken and processed on site. The camera was part of a network used to watch access points and camps. The person responsible had a record for trespass and poaching. He had been moving camps to avoid notice. He was taken into custody after being found with untagged hides and wire snares. The explanation settled things into place. The careful piles were markers and waste, arranged to keep scavengers away and to signal paths. The circling was surveillance, timed to stay hidden. The woods had felt crowded because they were, not with spirits or myths, but with someone who knew the land too well and had decided it belonged to him. I did not go back. I keep the memory of the creek as it was when we were young. That place holds my brother without needing me there. The forest does not care about grief, but it remembers habits. In July of 2018, I learned that the scariest part of the woods is not what you imagine in the dark, but what another person can do when they think no one is watching. I took the survey job because it was the only call back I got after the warehouse shut down. Late October 2014, northern Idaho. Cold mornings that bit through denim, afternoons that never warmed. No snow yet, just frost that burned off slow. The land was part of an old timber claim, logged hard decades earlier, then left in pieces. My task was simple on paper. Walk the lines, find the old pins, flag boundaries, check the maps against what still existed. I worked alone most days. The company truck stayed parked at a wide spot off a forest road that barely deserved the name. From there I walked in. The woods were thick but tired. Second growth fir, cedar in the low ground, alder where water sat. Old stumps everywhere, some cut flat and gray, others jagged and black. The ground held the smell of rot and cold needles. Every step made a soft crunch. The maps were old. Some were copies of copies, edges soft from being handled too much. Lines ran straight where the land never did. Elevation marks felt like guesses. I carried a GPS unit, compass, tape, flagging, and a notebook. I trusted the compass more than anything with a screen. By the third day, I knew something was off. Pins were missing or bent. Some were fresh metal where rust should have been. A few had bright tape tied on that was not mine. The angles between markers did not match the bearings. When I checked distance, it was close but not right. Always close enough to doubt myself. I assumed mistakes. Old claims overlap. People cut corners. Maps lie. I told myself that while I walked. Footprints showed up where no roads existed. Boot prints. Deep heel, wide toe. New. The soil still held shape. They crossed my lines, wandered off, then doubled back. No tire tracks. No flagging. Just prints. I marked them in my notes and kept moving. The forest stayed quiet. No birds after mid-morning. Wind stayed high but never strong. I felt watched in the simple way you do when you are alone too long. I blamed the cold. One morning I started early. Frost coated everything. I followed an old skid trail that barely showed, just a dip between young trees. After 10 minutes I stopped. There were boot prints ahead of me, same pattern as mine, same width, same heel wear. The spacing matched my stride. They were fresh enough to sit on top of the frost. I stood still and checked behind me. My own prints came back clean and separate. The ones ahead did not connect to mine. They began further up the trail, like someone stepped down already wearing my boots. I crouched and pressed a finger into one print. It was sharp and clean. I felt a tightness in my chest that had nothing to do with the cold. I stepped beside it and made a new print. Same depth, same edge. I told myself it was a common boot. I told myself someone walked earlier and the frost settled again. I kept walking. The prints stayed ahead for a while, then veered off into brush where I had not planned to go. I did not follow them. I stayed on my bearing and reached a ridge where an old pin should have been. It was there, but it had been moved. The soil around it was loose and dark. Someone had pulled it and reset it a few feet downslope. That change shifted the boundary enough to matter. I felt slow anger then. This was not random. Someone was adjusting lines. Over the next week, I found more signs. Fresh cuts on old blaze trees. New stakes driven near old ones. Tape colors I did not use. Footprints that appeared and disappeared. Always boots. Always close to my size. My truck stayed locked. Nothing went missing. My gear stayed where I left it. At night, I slept in a rented room in town and drove back each morning. One afternoon, I followed a line that cut into a shallow draw. Water trickled under ice. I found a pin hammered deep where it should not be. Beside it lay a glove, cheap rubber palm, canvas back. Wet but not old. I left it where it was and marked the spot. The next morning my GPS showed a track already logged along the route I planned to walk. I knew I had cleared the memory the night before. The track started from the road, followed my intended path, then stopped at a cluster of markers I had not reached yet. That was when the fear settled in steady and cold. Someone knew my plan. Someone had my maps or had watched me enough to predict them. I started changing routes, cutting in from odd angles, backtracking on purpose. The signs still appeared. One day I found my own boot prints ahead again, this time leading straight to the spot where I had left the glove. They ended there. The glove was gone. I worked faster after that. I documented everything. Photos, coordinates, notes written tight and clean. I kept my head down and did not linger. The answer came on a gray afternoon when I followed a bearing that cut close to the edge of the claim. I found fresh sawdust. Not much. Hidden under needles. Nearby, an old road had been reopened by hand. Brush cut back just enough for an ATV. It led toward a section of timber that still held value. I climbed a small rise and saw stacked logs through the trees. New cuts. Clean ends. Hidden well from the main roads. This was theft. Slow, careful, meant to look like it belonged on the other side of a line. The moved markers made sense. Shift the boundary. Cut. Move out small loads. No noise that would travel. No big machines. The footprints were part of it. Someone followed me to see what I found. Someone copied my prints to confuse me, to make me doubt myself. My boot model was common because the local supply store sold it cheap. They knew that. The GPS track came from someone using my unit when I stepped away from the truck one morning. I remembered then the door I had left unlocked for a few minutes while I used the brush. Nothing missing, I thought. I was wrong. I did not confront anyone. I marked the illegal cut area, took photos from distance, and walked out a different way than I came. My heart stayed high in my chest the whole time. I kept my pace steady and did not look back. That night, I organized everything. The next day, I turned it in. The company escalated it. State Forestry got involved. The job shut down for a while. I did not go back into those woods. Months later, I heard that 2 locals were charged. They had been shifting pins on old claims for years, cutting small loads, selling them quiet. One of them had worked survey jobs before. He knew the tricks. He knew how to unsettle someone alone in the trees. When I think about it now, the fear feels clean. No mystery left in it. just people doing bad work in a place that makes small sounds feel huge. The woods did not do anything to me. They only held the proof.